Your Honor, please, the prosecution has one more witness to introduce. Mr. John Graham Whitfield.
John Graham Whitfield, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Kindly state your name.
John Graham Whitfield.
And what is your business, or rather, your occupation?
I am the president of the Whitfield National Bank.
It is obvious, Mr. Whitfield, that you are well qualified to pass judgment on financial matters. Can you tell us of the state of Mr. Faulkner's business immediately preceding his death?
I should say it was desperate, but not hopeless. My bank had made a loan of $25 million to Mr. Faulkner to save his enterprises. Needless to say, that money is now gone.
What prompted you to make such a loan, Mr. Whitfield?
Well, he was married to my daughter, and her happiness has always been of utmost importance to me. However, the decision was not entirely of a personal nature. Realizing the countless tragedies to small investors the crash would bring, I felt it was my responsibility as a banker to do everything I could and try to prevent it.
Is it possible that you would have risked such a considerable sum in Faulkner's enterprises if you had believed them hopelessly destined to crash?
Certainly not. It was a difficult undertaking, but I believe the crash could have been prevented had Faulkner lived.
He therefore had no reason to commit suicide as far as his business affairs were concerned.
He had every reason to remain alive.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, can you tell us whether Faulkner was happy in his family life, in his relations with your daughter?
Mr. Flint, I have always felt that the home and family are man's first responsibility in life. Mr. Faulkner had found happiness with my daughter, and my daughter had found complete happiness with Mr. Faulkner.
What did you know of Faulkner personally?
Mr. Flint, it's only fair to say that there were many traits of Mr. Faulkner's to which I could not approve. He and I were as different as any two human beings could be. I believe in one's responsibility to others far beyond one's responsibility to self. Bjorn Faulkner only believed in himself.
From your knowledge of him, then, Mr. Whitfield, would you say that you consider it possible that Bjorn Faulkner committed suicide?
I would consider it absolutely impossible.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. That is all.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, were you very fond of your son-in-law?
I was.
And you never disagreed with him, never lost your temper in a quarrel?
Mr. Stevens, I don't lose my temper.
And yet, if memory serves, there was some kind of a trouble about the time you made that stupendous loan to Mr. Faulkner.
Purely a misunderstanding.
Oh.
Mr. Faulkner unethically hastened to obtain that loan from me, which I would have given him without any question for my daughter's sake.
Now, you said that your fortune had been badly damaged by the Faulkner crash.
It had.
And that your financial situation is rather strained at present.
It is.
Then how could you afford to put a $25,000 reward out for the arrest of Larry Regan?
Your Honor, we object. What has this to do with the case?
Your Honor, if I may, I would like the opportunity to explain that.
Very well.
I did offer such a reward. We all know the man commonly known as Larry Regan is a notorious criminal who extorts money from people for so-called protection. He had menaced Mr. Faulkner and had threatened my daughter. I felt it was only better to buy him off.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, one second. Mr. Whitfield, would you kindly tell us why you and your daughter disappeared so suddenly on the night of January the 16th?
I would think that's fairly obvious. My daughter was crushed after the loss of her husband, and I hastened to take her away.
Now, you love your daughter profoundly, don't you, Mr. Whitfield?
I do.
And you made a point of it that her every wish should be granted.
I have.
And when she, or you, desire something, you don't ever stop at the price, do you?
Mr. Stevens, You've never had
Then
to
would
raise
you refuse to buy her the man she's always wanted?
Mr. Stevens.
You wouldn't stop if it took your entire fortune to break the first unbreakable man you'd ever met.
Your Honor, we object!
Sustained.
Exception. Now perhaps you will tell us, Mr. Whitfield, that your money had nothing to do with Mr. Faulkner dismissing Miss Andre.
Absolutely.
That no ultimatum was given to him.
No.
And why is that, Mr. Whitfield?
You are quite mistaken in your insinuation, Mr. Stevens. My daughter was not in the least jealous of Karen
I would be careful of statements like that, Mr. Whitfield. Remember, it was your daughter that was elevated to the high state of matrimony by purchase.
Your Honor, we object!
Calder.
I could
Calder.
crush you like a worm! I'm crushing out bigger than you!
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. That is just what I was trying to prove. That is all.
Your Honor, we move that the defense counsel's outrageous remark, which incited this incident, be stricken from the record.
Remark may go out.
People rest.
Move that the case be dismissed for lack of evidence.
Denied.
Exception. Men and women of the jury, we cannot pass judgment on Karen Andre without first passing it on Bjorn Faulkner. He was the man who held himself outside all moral standards. And whether he was above or below them is a question for each of us to decide personally. But remember, he was the man who said that he needed no reasons for his actions, that he was the reason. The man who said that laws are for the weak and that the strong are the laws. If you will remember this, you will understand that the financial condition into which he was thrown in his last few months was so insufferable to him that he would resort to the most desperate of means to escape from it, including suicide. And that is what the defense will prove. Our first witness will be Sigurd Youngquist.